Good afternoon, good evening. Welcome everybody to this week's IMCO Maternity Natural Health webinar. And I'm very excited today to be introducing to you Sheila, who is an absolute goddess of ecstatic birth. And so we're very, very pleased to be doing that. But before we do that, just a little bit of housekeeping. And so when you are signing in, if you would like to go into the chat area and let us know whereabouts you are in the world, and what your health profession is, or maybe you're a woman expecting a baby, or maybe you're both. So do let us know that. And of course, down the bottom of your screen is also the Q&A button. So if you've got any questions for Sheila, please put those in there. So as people are signing on, say a big hello, Sheila.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Kathy, for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, we are so excited to have you here. Having been a midwife myself who's done a lot of normal births, a lot of home births and birth centre births for my predominant birthing. So I have witnessed ecstatic birth a lot, and it's so doable, it's so achievable. But I'm going to let Sheila go through all that today, but just a little bit of an introduction to her. So she is a Yale and Columbia trained cultural psychologist who is passionate about transforming the landscape of birth from pain to pleasure. And as an ecstatic birth advocate and trainer, Sheila empowers birth practitioners and expectant mums around the globe to integrate the most holistic birthing tool, which is pleasure. It's so true. And using that tool of pleasure into birth preparation and support of labour. And so welcome.
So happy to be here. And I love that you shared that you as a midwife were able to witness so many ecstatic births, because I know sometimes people will look at me like, what are you doing? What are you talking about? Is that even real? And so it's beautiful to have that introduction. Thank you, Kathy.
It is. And it's like when you see, hundreds and hundreds of normal births, you can't not see ecstatic birth.
Yeah.
You see it. Yeah. It's just without trying, you see it. But it is all about, isn't it, women putting their heads around it before. It's so much as that preparation. But look, I don't want to be taking this over, because you're who we're here to learn all from today. It's just, I'm just seeing we're starting to get some of our lovely midwives putting in there, and other health professionals in the maternity field then to put their information in there. So that's wonderful. So what's going to happen in this webinar is that Sheila is going to take over the screen for the next half an hour or so, and she's got a PowerPoint that she'll go over, and then at the end we'll do some Q&As, but we will make sure that any questions are answered. And if a Q&A does come through that needs to get answered in the middle, it's not getting answered, well, I'll make sure it is. So welcome, and I'll let you take over the screen.
All right, fantastic. I do have a slideshow, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And you can see that, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely perfect.
Okay, great. So birthing with pleasure, supporting women in ecstatic birth. That's what we're going to talk about today. And I'm going to guide you through some strategies for how you can do that for yourself and your clients. So I know this is something that you're all holding near and dear to your heart, but I think it's worth laying it down that childbirth can be one of the most empowering, transformative, and potentially pleasurable events in a woman's life. And so if you're listening to this, likely this is something that you hold near and dear to your heart. This is a vision that you hold for your clients, for women in birth. And so often, if you're actively working in birth, what you see is the opposite. And so we're going to talk about how to navigate that so that it's not so draining on you as a space holder. A little bit about me first. I'm a mother of 3, and this work really is very near and dear to my heart. My first birth was traumatic, and it was, I loved being pregnant and I loved feeling the power of my body, and I wanted to feel that in birth, but I had no context. I had no family or community or even role model ahead of me that could show me how to do that. And so the birth that I had was quite the opposite, and that took me on a long healing journey. And then when I got pregnant the second time, it was like, I am not doing that again. And I'm going to figure out a different way. And so I prepared mind, body, heart, and soul and had this beautiful, like, reclamation birth, really healed my relationship with my body. And then for the third, I thought to myself, you know what? I know I can do this. I know I can give birth in this raw, primal, connected way. I want to know if I can enjoy it. Not just like the gorgeous aftermath of, like, having the baby in my arms and feeling like I did it, but I wanted to know if I can actually enjoy the process of labor. Because in every book I had read, and this was now 15 years ago, this is pre the orgasmic birth documentary. This is, back then when I would Google pleasure in birth, orgasm birth, ecstatic birth, like not much would come up at all. There would be one line in like a 300-page book that said something like, some women experience heightened states of bliss, ecstasy, and orgasm when they're giving birth. And I was like, well, I want to know what that's about. And at the time, this was a big part of my healing journey. I was very involved with a school for pleasure in New York City known as Mama Gina School of Womanly Arts. And I was learning about, like, my connection to my body, how amazing my body is. My body has wisdom, and I have access to, like, ever deepening layers of pleasure through my body, ecstatic pleasure, orgasmic pleasure. And one of the things that struck me is that the language of natural birth and the language of sensual expansion, orgasmic expansion, like learning to feel pleasure in your body, learning to expand that pleasure, learning to have an orgasm or multiple orgasms, it was one and the same as the language of natural birth. So when I say that, I mean like the mindset, paying very close attention to sensation, like being really in your body, the tools, the practices, breath, sound, movement. So I thought, okay, for this third birth, I'm going to bridge the two. I'm going to bring them together. I'm going to prepare for my birth by really integrating these tools of sensual expansion into my being. And as birth often does, it looked totally different from how I imagined it. I thought I would have this very, like, sensual birth experience. And what actually happened in the moment was I didn't want my husband anywhere near me. I didn't even want to be touched. And so we put on some music, and from that deeply connected place to my body, I started to move and let my body guide the movement. And what it felt like with those contractions would come and overtake me and then kind of leave me pulsing on the floor. And it was like that. That was how I labored and birthed my baby. And this was an experience that transcended even what I had imagined. And I remember saying to my husband, I don't understand. Like, here I was preparing for pleasure in birth. Why didn't I know what was possible? Like, this was totally different. Why didn't I know? And why doesn't every woman know what's possible? So that's what began my career as a writer, speaker, and ecstatic birth advocate, which slowly over time turned into, like, I want to create a platform to share everything I learned with the people around me. I had some very beautiful teachers, started sharing those. I started working with women one-on-one, and I started to notice that a lot of birth practitioners were signing up for what I was offering. A lot of doulas, childbirth educators, midwives, nurses, like the whole spectrum. And I said, well, why are you here? Like, don't you already know this? Isn't this like common knowledge in the trainings that you did? And overwhelmingly, I heard, no, it's not. We want this. We need this. We want to bring it to our clients. And so that's how the ecstatic birth practitioner training was born, where I bring all of these tools of pleasure and sensuality, and we weave it into the birthing process so that as practitioners, we can embody it, so that we can give it to our clients. And at the very least, so we can hold that tone for pleasure when we enter the birthing room. So that's the ecstatic birth practitioner training. I also have a program, a digital program, Oh Baby, which is for expectant moms. And you can find me online at ecstatic-birth.com. enough about me. Let's talk about you as a prenatal and birth practitioner. Each of you has a powerful opportunity to raise consciousness and empower an expectant mom through this transformative rite of passage in ways that could dramatically alter her experience of birth. You can empower each woman you work with to enjoy the journey of labor and delivery rather than simply endure it. And I know that you hold this vision, and what my experience running the practitioner training for the last 5 years has shown me is that as birth practitioners, like, we are mothering the mothers. So when you think about the legacy of motherhood overall, for the most part around the globe, it's one of like self-sacrifice. It's one of depletion. And I have seen this over and over and over again with the women in my training. They come in, you all have such big heart souls. You're holding such a beautiful vision for your clients. But when you're witnessing systems, structures that do not support this vision that you're holding, when you're seeing, unfortunately, like, backgrounds of trauma in a woman's body play out in the birthing room, that can be really, really depleting. And so ecstatic birth, as I take you through these different strategies, I want you to think about these strategies, yes, as things you can bring to your clients, but first and foremost, as things you can bring to yourself, to your body, to nourish yourself so that you can in turn bring your full presence, your full ecstasy into the birthing room to support your clients. So I'm going to guide you through some strategies. The first one is the idea of disconnecting ecstasy from outcome. A lot of times people will say to me, so like, is an ecstatic birth, is that like a natural birth? Is it, like a water birth? Is it like, do you have to be unmedicated? And it's like, yes, yes, yes. And it can also be an emergency cesarean section. How? Ecstasy, if I was to ask you, when was the last time you experienced ecstasy? If we were to survey every person watching this webinar, you would probably get as many different answers. Someone might have been in nature, someone might have been in the bedroom, someone might have been tasting something so sensuous and delicious. So ecstasy is not about a specific circumstance. Ecstasy is a feeling. If I was to say to you, what did it feel like? Then we would start to get some commonalities between the answers. Ecstasy is like a high, it's an expansive feeling. There's a feeling of connection there also. So the emphasis with ecstatic birth is really on how it feels rather than the specific circumstances of the birth. And another thing is, the idea of an ecstatic birth, much like an ecstatic life, is an ideal. And when working with clients, the last thing I want to do is set them up to say, like, this is another thing. This is yet another thing you have to achieve in your lifetime, or you feel like a failure. Like, that is so contrary to the spirit of ecstatic birth and the spirit of what we're hoping for our clients, right? So to really, when we're talking to our clients, to hold it as a point of inspiration. And what is, when you're thinking about like your ideal life, it's something to aspire to. It's something that elevates you. And so I really want you to think about ecstatic birth in those terms. And lastly, a lot of times clients will ask us, what's the right decision? Well, the right decision for me might not be the right decision for you. So a big piece of this is empowering our clients to make the right choices for them rather than the quote unquote right choices. All right, birth is a sexual act. I know that might feel edgy to some of you, and I'll tell you, it took me a few years to be able to say that out loud and a few more years to be able to say it without cringing inside. And so it's such a simple idea that birth is a sexual act, and yet it really challenges us because, everything baby is like over here, pure and clean in this corner, and sexuality is kept very separate for the most part from children. And so bringing them together, birth is a sexual act, can sometimes feel really challenging, can sometimes feel even profane in a culture that really keeps children and sexuality separate. But of course, we're conceiving our babies with our sexual bodies. And so we birth our babies with our sexual bodies. So as a practitioner, first step is just to raise consciousness. When your clients understand this interconnected nature between giving birth and their sexuality, it changes everything. Because if you think about who hasn't had a sexual experience that felt like amazing, orgasmic, blissful, but in the same body, who hasn't had a sexual experience that didn't feel so great, or maybe even hurt, or was maybe even traumatic, right? it's really easy for people to understand how in the same body, both experiences are possible. And so the difference is whether or not we're really honoring our body and its processes. When we're not honoring our body, if you imagine having sex in fear, if you imagine having sex when you're not turned on or your tissues aren't engorged, ouch, right? So birth is very similar. And this is unfortunately the way most women are giving birth. So much like you can train to enjoy pleasure in the bedroom, you can also train to enjoy pleasure in birth. You can literally train your body to be able to access those inner realms of pleasure, so that when you understand birth as a sexual act, then you can start to bring those tools in with clients who have the gift of time to really start to train their bodies. Pleasure. I believe pleasure is the most powerful holistic birthing tool there is. Now, why is that? Pleasure is very closely linked with oxytocin flow. As you all know, oxytocin is that governing hormone of labor. So rather than starting a Pitocin drip, bring in pleasure. It does the same thing. It stimulates that oxytocin flow, but it also feels really good. So this is a really simple way to elevate a woman's experience in birth. Give her pleasure, bring in pleasure. Think of all 5 senses and what are things that she can source her pleasure from. It might be physical touch. It might be music. It might be beautiful images that inspire her and remind her to relax and open, right? So the simplest way is literally just to think of all 5 senses and bring pleasure in. And that's true for you all as practitioners too. You know, sometimes you're attending births for 12 hours, 18 hours, 24 hours. That gets pretty tiring. So sourcing from your pleasure, stimulating oxytocin flow in your own body can be a really deeply nourishing process. And then undertaking that journey of sensual expansion that I talked about, learning how to access pleasure from within, which, you know, some women can literally close their eyes and drop into rolling waves of orgasm. That is possible for every woman who wants it, every woman who's willing to practice and devote herself to it. And that's amazing for a birthing mom to bring into the labor and delivery room. But imagine even you as a birth practitioner. We know that the birthing field is contagious, right? We know that if somebody walks in that's full of fear, that will transmit to the birthing mom. So imagine you're able to walk in and bring that oxytocin flow in. What an effortless way to support your clients, but also support yourself, your body, your nervous system while you're supporting your client. All right, and another pillar is this idea that we rebirth with each birth. So as you're witnessing your client's giving birth to her baby, she's rebirthing herself, right? From maiden to mother, or from mother of one to mother of two. There's a rebirthing process that's happening. And that's happening for us too as practitioners. So every time you're at a birth, you can imagine that you yourself are rebirthing as well. There's a underlying current in life, in birth and orgasm, of expansion and contraction, expansion and contraction. And that is true, we see this in labor. We see this in taking breaths, breathing in and out. We see this in how a flower blooms, this rhythm of expansion and contraction. So when you're attending a birth, noticing the places where your body gets contracted, that's where you have potential to grow and to expand. Your body will show you that. So, I've heard Dr. Christiane Northrup, who was a guest teacher in one of my programs, shared that a lot of women that work in birth are attracted to birth to heal their own patterns. And I think that's true of like anything that you're attracted to, anything that you desire. There's something there for you. There is underlying our whole lives this current of like expansion and contraction. So when you're drawn to something, that can feel expansive, and then you can notice that it stirs up your stuff, and you can notice that in the literal contraction of your body. So this is really a place where we can ride those waves of birth for ourselves and really feel like we're coming out of each birth more ourselves than ever before. And this is a beautiful way to really expand your energy as you're supporting your clients. It is also, by the way, I'd want to mention this for clients that don't have the birth that they want. It is also a great way to frame them in the larger context of their journey. You know, some women have major contractions around fertility. They have a hard time getting pregnant. Some women have really hard pregnancies, right? That's a contractive moment on their road to motherhood. Some women's contractive moment is in birth. And so understanding that rhythm and being able to articulate it and support your client through it in a way that really supports them in flowing through the contraction and coming through the other side, which is very expansive, is a beautiful way to support clients that may not have had the circumstances that they had wished for in birth, but there's still so much potential for ecstasy there in that, like doing the work towards the expansion. And then holding the tone for ecstatic birth. So this is what I was alluding to before, where you can walk into the birthing field holding that tone for ecstasy. So you can have in your mind the image of, oh, like empowering, beautiful, blissful, joyful experience on a mental level. But what's even more powerful is when you can hold that in your body. So a big part of ecstatic birth work that I do with both expectant moms and with birth practitioners is learning to connect to the body and the language of the body, which is sensation. So really, you know, a lot of us treat our bodies as like a means to move our head from place to place. We're really very much in our head space. We're really very much in our thinking brains, but you can't birth with your head, right? We all know that. You birth with your body, and your body's wisdom is accessed through that language of sensation. Your body actually wants to feel good, right? So when we experience pain, pain is an indicator. It's a form of guidance. And that's true in birth as well as any other place. So if you train your body to be able to move towards what feels good, being deeply connected to sensation, then that's your inner wisdom at work. And like I said, you can learn to feel more pleasure at will and also disconnect from outcome for yourselves. That's how you hold the tone for ecstatic birth within your own body as a practitioner. And you can't talk about birth without talking about the shadow side of birth, because we really are governed by the shadow side. Most of our systems and structures are created from this place of preventing pain, managing fear. This is very much our cultural climate. Now, the thing with resistance to the shadow, if we're resisting the fear or resisting the pain as opposed to moving towards pleasure, resistance actually fuels the shadow. So one of the things we want to do with clients and also for ourselves is really actively disarm fears ahead of time, so that our work in birth is not so much resistance of the fear or resistance of the contractions, but our work is actually like moving towards what feels good, moving towards the pleasure. When somebody feels fear, there's a literal physical constriction in the body. And that constriction blocks blood flow, it blocks energy flow, which makes the body have to work that much harder. So that kicks up the intensity, which kicks up the fear, which kicks up the resistance. And you can see how it starts to downward spiral. So the more you can disarm fears ahead of time, the more you're kind of clearing the pathway for someone to move towards what feels good as opposed to resisting what doesn't feel good. And then last but not least, how do you dance with the unexpected? Because the unexpected is probably the one thing that you know that you can 100% expect in birth. So really, this gets into some personal growth work of really looking at your patterns, really having your client look at her patterns of how do you react to the unexpected? What patterns do you have in place that deeply serve you? And what patterns do you have that don't? And how can you start to shift those and practice those ahead of birth, and really working through those scenarios so that when the unexpected emerges, it does feel like a dance. It doesn't feel like you're resisting or fighting it, but it feels more like a fluid dance between, you know, what's emerging and what you're trying to create. So yeah, so those are the 5 pillars. Moving forward, I really encourage you all to honor your births, whether they're physical births or metaphorical births, with pleasure. We know that pleasure is a really, really powerful tool in birth, and pleasure also takes us from that contractive space into that more expansive space. So consciously, actively integrating pleasure into your births is really, really powerful tool. And learning to feel, really learning to feel the sensations in your body, supporting your clients and connecting to the sensations in the body. And this is really where our deepest wisdom resides, a wisdom that integrates our mental, rational wisdom, but also integrates our experiential wisdom, our ancestral wisdom, our primal wisdom, our generational wisdom, right? So really connecting with that. And this is also where our pleasure lives, in this place of sensation in our body. So learning how to feel is an integral part of ecstatic birth preparation and support. If you're interested in delving deeper, I do offer the ecstatic birth training sessions and the ecstatic birth practitioner training, as well as lots of really a whole spectrum of ways to bring ecstatic birth to your clients. I'm currently have live this complimentary video training series for birth practitioners if you are interested in learning more. And like I mentioned, I do have that year-long ecstatic birth practitioner training, which actually begins in June. So we're in early registration period right now. If you want to learn more about that, you can visit ecstaticbirth.pro. And I did create a code for this community to receive $500 off if you do choose to register before April 25th. So I'm going to pause here. That's the crux of my presentation, and I'd love to open to any discussion or questions. There you are, Kathy.
Oh, that's absolutely fabulous. Okay, so when you talk about the, so you say that you've got some free information there.
Yeah.
Could you just, it's because people will be watching this, you know, in months and years to come. Can you just go over maybe that particular, you know, what's that about, and how long does it take, and what will they sort of learn? Is that for the birth practitioners only, or is that for the expectant mums as well?
Yeah, great question. So I offer both. I figured this is more of a community of birth practitioners. If you go to my website, ecstatic-birth.com, whether you're watching this in 2 days or in 2 years, you should be able to find those free offerings that I have. But I will tell you at this moment in time, that video training series is a 3-video series that is primarily for birth practitioners. And what you get is more information about how to use pleasure as a holistic birthing tool, a practice that you can start doing for yourself to really connect you to sensation and expand your pleasure, as well as bring to your clients a super simple practice. And then sort of like the cultural mindset, like how can we actually, as birth practitioners, transform the culture of birth? Because sometimes it can feel like I'm just one person. How can it, like, that's a huge, overwhelming task. And believe me, I get it, because it's a big part of my mission. And so really talking about, like, how can you do that? How can you do that within your own workspace? How can you do that within your community? How can you start to bring this elevation to the birth world around you? So that's the video training series for practitioners. I have what I'm calling like an expectant moms bundle for future and expectant mothers. And that what that is it's a complimentary training. There's a 10-day email series where it really walks you through all the different facets of ecstatic birth. It also includes like a 30-minute masterclass to kind of to lay the groundwork, like sort of what I did here, like what is ecstatic birth and why does it matter and why would you want it? And does it mean that you have to have a water birth or like a birth in the jungle, or like, you know, so it really like lays the foundation. And it also offers a few practices that they can start to integrate into their birth preparation so that they can set themselves up to have this type of experience.
That's fantastic. And you say that that's available free?
Yeah, that's all free on my website.
Yeah, so the birth practitioners are able to give that link information to their clients.
Yeah, totally.
And access that, which is obviously wonderful. And what do you think is, in your experience, what do you think is sort of the most ideal gestation, you know, stage in the pregnancy? I certainly, in my practice over the years, I do find that once women get into that 3rd trimester, and they kind of, somewhere at about that 28, 29 weeks, they realize, oh, okay, you know, like this baby has to come out. And usually by sort of 32 weeks, they're really starting to go, oh, I need to know. And by 34 weeks, they're almost a little panicked if they haven't. And sometimes, especially with those first pregnancies, I think that there is often a case with the mums to be that they are still prioritizing the needs of work, and buying the pram that they want, and getting the nursery painted, and they're still not necessarily always putting the time aside that is so important that they should be for getting ready mentally for labor and birth. So what do you think is the best way for women to experience that complementary program of yours?
Yeah, I typically tell women as soon as they start wondering about it is probably when you should start. And so,
Nice.
you know,
nice.
As you know, that, you know, our birth education begins with our own birth and continues with all the messages that we're absorbing our whole lives. And so it's really about, when do they awaken to this idea of like, how do I want to have a birth? How do I want to prepare for birth? And for some women, it happens preconception. And for a lot of women, I get a lot of like, oh my God, I'm 35 weeks. What can I do? You know, like a lot of that, like last minute eek panic. And so the interesting thing about pleasure is it works both ways, right? So I love a woman, like most of my one-on-one clients are women that really have the luxury of time and are able to devote themselves to an ever deepening practice of pleasure in their own body. That said, if you're 35 weeks, 37 weeks, and you're coming and saying, what can I do? The answer is so simple. Give yourself pleasure in whatever way you can. So some women are perfectly okay with put your hand on your clitoris and do not remove it the entire time you're in labor. And some women, that's like a completely horrifying thought, right? So for the women that can't even think about like sexual pleasure in birth, which, you know, it is not every woman can actually go there. You talk about other kinds of pleasure, right? So you talk about like other, like, does your partner hold you a certain way that has you feel like really loved and supported? Do you like to laugh? Like partners love making their birthing partners laugh, and laughter, we know, opens the throat, which opens our cervix, and right. So there's lots of other ways that you can literally give yourself pleasure in the birthing room, that it's simple. It's as simple as that. Like bringing in a beautiful piece of music, moving your body in a way that feels good. Those things are really accessible, even if you're very close to your due date. So it's really about, you know, for practitioners that are listening, it's really about like meeting each woman, each birthing person exactly where they're at, and giving them as much or as little as they're able and willing to take on.
Yeah. I just love that. And tell us more about the longer, bigger course that you do. I mean, this is not a platform where we sell stuff and market, and that's not what this is for. But this is, I see this more as, you know, a provider of information. So, you know, for obviously, I guess, you know, particularly with COVID, and now everybody's familiar with Zoom, and you know, so the idea of being in one country and learning from somebody in another country, it's so doable, it's so accepted now. You don't have to be in person. And so tell us a little bit more about, I guess, what the commitment is for somebody to be doing that bigger course of yours.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, when I started doing this work 10 years ago, I had, you know, 3 young children. And I realized very quickly, even though I was in New York City at the time, I realized very quickly that there was not like a concentration of women in any one place that would be interested in ecstatic birth. So I've been doing this work virtually since the very beginning. So this is a virtual program, and it is a global program. So there are women that participate from all around the world, which is really beautiful because you get that interconnected like wisdom, and you get participants in all different kinds of modalities. So
Yes.
all different types of practitioners can support women in birth. And so you get this like integrative learning. So that's one piece. It's being in this community of like-minded practitioners where you're really hearing each other's, desires, visions, and also struggles, and being able to come together and integrate that. Because a lot of times what I hear over and over again is, I'm the only person where I work that really believes in this, and they think I'm crazy, right? And so
Yes.
when you're working in that type of environment, it can just be so overwhelmingly difficult to keep holding that vision when everyone around you rolls their eyes when you mention like ecstatic birth or pleasure in birth, or a woman enjoying birth, like, oh, here she goes again, right? So to have that community is, I think, whether or not you do my training is irrelevant. Like, I really encourage you all to search out like those like-minded people so that you can really hold that vision together. The other piece of the training is the sensual expansion. My training is not, my training in childbirth comes by way of my own experience and the collaborations I've done through the years. But my formal training is in cultural sociology, which is how patterns shift over time in society, and also in sexuality. So I have a lot of training in like Taoist and tantric sexual modalities. So what I bring forward in this training is for the practitioners, like, how can you really connect to the pleasure in your own body and expand that pleasure? And I take you through that journey over 9 months. So it becomes like your own rebirth. So when you can embody each of these phases, you're much more effective at bringing it forward for your clients. You can really hold space in a much more like embodied and secure way. And then we talk about like, how do the next 3 months are like, okay, how do you bring it to your clients? But first, it's really about you all and nourishing your bodies, because like I said, there's depletion everywhere. That's just a part of our culture. So how do we nourish your body? How do we get you to connect to your pleasure? How do we put that into your world, your body, your realm, so that then you can bring it to your clients in a way that's not just talk, but really fully presenced. So you were asking about the commitment. It's about a 3-hour commitment per week over the course of 1 year. So it's
Wow.
not,
Okay, so it's quite significant.
it is a long-term commitment, but
Mhm.
it's also not 20 hours a week, right? The idea is that you can actually start to integrate this into your life, into your practice right away. And the practices that I teach are actually pretty short. They're, they're 5 minutes-ish for the most part, because I want you to be able to bring them into your workplace. I want you to be able to bring them into the birthing room. I really want you to be able to bring them everywhere you go. While it's lovely to go on a week-long retreat in Bali and like expand in pleasure in all these ways, when you come back to your midwifery practice or to your doula clients, how are you gonna bridge that gap, right? So the practices, the pleasure practices that I teach are specifically for you to start integrating them in your life right away, so that it becomes a way of being. And the reason it's spread out over a year, like I could have easily condensed the content, but so much of it is practice.
Right.
Excuse me.
Having that time.
Mm-hmm.
Would you also, I'm quite curious, if we go back to the beginning of your own personal story, where with your third birth, you did experience ecstatic birth, but could you just go over a little bit again about the difference? I'm interested in the difference of what did you think it was going to be like, and then what was it like?
Yeah, I thought it was going to be this like very sensuous sexual experience. Like I was practicing with all of these like sensual expansion modalities, breath, sound, and movement, but specifically with a focus on like orgasmic pleasure. And I thought, I thought maybe my husband and I would play a little bit or something like that. And my body just was not into it. But, a lot of that preparation in orgasmic expansion and pleasure was really about feeling my body, following my body, like learning where the expansive flow was. And so what I found was, I had a very pokey labor. We tried like walking around the block as they do in all the books a few times. I was like, whatever. But when the music came on and I really allowed myself to just go inward, right? Inward. And it was my
Yes.
body leading the whole time. I was not thinking, I was not performing, there was really not that much mind chatter happening at all. It was happening from this inward, deeply connected place. And it was like my
Yes.
body was guiding the movements. And so because it happened like that, there was definitely a trance state. And it was really fun because I was dancing. So I was really enjoying the music that I brought. I was enjoying the movement. There was a trance inner state. And there was a feeling of like going really high, like transcending there. It was intense. I'm not going to say it wasn't intense because I remember like the contractions would come and I would literally like end up like squatting on the floor and then they would leave and I would just like lie there. But in the lying there, like all that energy flooding through my body, it was amazing. It really took me higher than I've ever been in my life. And I was really grateful actually. You know, in my second birth, I didn't share this. I did have this moment as my baby's head was coming down the vaginal canal. I had this moment of feeling my vulva expand and contract. And I was like, oh, it's true. Women can have like orgasms when they're giving birth. Like there was such a moment. And then as soon as I thought that, like I went out of my body, came into my head. And so the moment passed. And so I think I was sort of guided by that moment. And I thought it would be like orgasmic. I thought it would be, you know, sexual, more sexual. And I'm really grateful, actually, I didn't have that experience because it was very easy for me to see how that was possible. But the experience that I had showed me like, whoa, it's like there's a whole spectrum of experiences that are possible, that it's just like, let your body lead and she'll take you to some amazing places. And so, you know, I also do this, I call it a weekly conversation to transform birth, where I talk to a lot of moms about their birth experiences and birth practitioners, and they share their birth stories. And you hear like these stories of ecstatic birth. They're, you know, like they're as varied as like snowflakes. It's amazing. Like every woman's story is totally different. And yet there's still this overwhelming feeling of like expansiveness and deep connection and a transcendence. And it's like, wow, like I couldn't have even conceived of this until I lived it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so women do have orgasmic
love listening to you talk because it's just so true. And when you're talking, I'm remembering the look on, well, hundreds of women's faces. There is something amazing that comes over themselves. And it's like they're so deep. They're so deeply connected, they're disconnected in a amazing way. And you know, and you can see it sort of coming particularly as the contractions get closer and closer together and there's less gap. And you know, when there's the space between the contractions, I would always say to my woman, the most important thing that you can do to help your labor after each contraction is laugh and giggle and smile, right?
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, oh, wow, that was such a good contraction, you know. But there gets to that place where there's not enough time to sort of come in and out and in and out, and the women stay in. And they're so deep in that place. They're so connected but separated all at the same time. And sometimes I've needed to pull the partners aside because you can see the partner starting to go like, where is she? You know, and they'll be saying things like, you know, are you okay? Like, and she's like, she is so in a different place. And so it can be almost a little nervous for the partners to see that connecting, disconnecting, ecstaticness, transcendentalness that's going on. And it's so stunning.
Yeah, it reminds me, one of the quotes that I
stunning.
love about birth, there's a quote that says something like, a woman, I think it's from Native American folklore, a woman goes out to the stars to collect the soul of her baby and bring it back with her. And that's what you're describing. There's like an otherworldliness to it, which is pretty
There
amazing.
is.
Yeah.
And it's all over her face.
Yeah.
And one of the things is a more sort of practical aspect of that is that when a woman is in that advanced part of labor, you know, and she's getting close to being fully dilated, and she's going to be, you know, her body's going to be starting to push soon, and that can be a time where, like, bearing in mind that the woman may have been in labor and latent labor for a couple of nights, and then she's in active labor for a few hours, and then sort of as she gets more, you know, she gets to that 7-8 centimeters or whatnot, and sometimes that's the time at which family start to arrive. And I think you would have seen it too, where you know, the mum or the mother-in-law comes in the room because we're getting closer to having a baby now, and you know, and the plan was that for all these people to be around at the birth, and it can so impact that place where that woman is, so detrimentally, and suddenly she's, you know, back in performance mode and needing to kind of socialize, and I think that's another area, and you probably cover that off within your birth prep, where that it is, you know, I describe it that it's like a bubble, and you know, it can just be burst so easily. It's very strong and it's very potent, but it's also fragile.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of one of those areas that I learned quite quickly, that you can do a lot of work supporting that woman getting into this amazing place, and her cervix is dilating so rapidly and the labor's going so well, and then her mother-in-law walks in. It kind of goes to custard. And and we can take quite a while to get back to where we were, for that woman emotionally and mentally. So that's just one of those kind of, and it's not that woman, that mother-in-law's done anything wrong at all, not at all. It's just that it's impacted the environment.
Yeah, I mean, it comes back to that idea that birth is a sexual act. So imagine like you're having this amazing time with your husband, and then your mother walks in, or your mother-in-law walks in. And it's like, oh, not now. Right? Like,
yes, that's it. Yes, and it's so true. In fact, I use that analogy myself over the years a lot with student doctors. And you know, when they are in that period where they're doing their obstetrics learning, and you know, they can have like these little notebooks where they need to tick off how many births they've attended, and you know, they're kind of sitting around on birthing suite waiting to get accepted, and I would always pull them aside and say, now, if this client allows you to be present, you need to realize that being present at the birth of her baby is as important as being present at the conception of that baby. And you know, suddenly this male, I'll pick a male, but you know, this male 22-year-old student doctor kind of goes, oh, you know, that's a bit different from ticking off how many appendectomies I've been at, you know. And it's amazingly fragile and incredibly powerful vibe.
And that's that example is such a strong indicator of how the way that we treat birth doesn't always serve birth, right? And so, you know, I know that there's a whole spectrum of practitioners that are going to be listening to this. Some of you will be attending in homes, and some of you in birthing centers, and some of you in hospitals, but really taking that beautiful example Kathy just gave to heart of like, this is a really sacred moment. And sometimes like the sacred and the sexual, when it comes to medical establishments, they don't really have a good understanding of how to honor them, and that can really disrupt the process. And so this is where we all need to work together to elevate consciousness around what birth is and how it works best and how to support our mamas. It's not something any one person can do, because a lot of times it's the systems and structures. Like a woman can really, really prepare, but if she's not in a place where, you know, her practitioners and the systems and structures can support her in that, there's not much, you know, that she can do.
No, you know, and when she's worked so beautifully well to get herself into that zone, and to be going inside herself, and she's surrendering to it, and the lighting is dim, and there's some beautiful music going on, and a doctor can walk in the room and turn the light on, and you're just like, it's just, it's so hard for them to get back to that place. So we have such a role of protection. Now we are getting close to running out of time. So is there anything that you would like to add that we haven't touched on? Anything you want to sort of add into as we conclude?
Yeah, I just kind of want to reiterate the consciousness that as much as you all like really, really care for your clients, like I know you do, because you wouldn't be doing the work that you're doing if you didn't, but that it really starts within your own body and your own ability to really like nourish yourself and feel pleasure to be able to bring that forward. And so just like we tell our moms, you know, you got to take care of yourself before you can take care of your baby. Like it's really bringing that consciousness up a level here, because even with the best of intentions, if we all are constantly coming up, and we live in a world where a lot of times we're coming up against opposite experiences, and that can be really, really depleting on your system. So I just really encourage all of you that are watching to really up your self-care and pleasure, and integrate pleasure into your work environments, integrate pleasure into your routines, personal and professional, to give yourself that nourishment as well.
Well said. When we all get back to flying more regularly, it's that whole thing, you know, of the parent needs to put the mask on themselves first. And I think that birth practitioners, because our job is 24/7, you know, we can live some of the most dreadful lifestyles. You know, and it's not healthy for us, you know, to lose as much sleep as we do, to have so much random sleep as we do, to, you know, drive through in the middle of the night because it's the only thing open and we need to get some food into our system. And yeah, it's very true. And I think that what you're saying is, it's just that reminder that we know we need to feed ourselves that energy first.
Yeah. And realizing that like birth is everywhere, you know, just as a very concrete example, like I consider an event like this a birth. So for me, this is a birth. I'm going somewhere new. I haven't been before. This is an experience, you know, even though I might have given birth to other babies like this many times before, this is still new. I don't know how it's going to go. And so thinking about like how to support yourself. I have aromatherapy going. This jacket is super soft, so I can touch it whenever I want to soothe myself. The painting behind me gives me a ton of pleasure, right? So just there are so many ways that you can integrate this wisdom, because really we're birthing all the time. We're constantly creating, and the wisdom of birth is something that you can start to integrate into all aspects of your life.
Oh, I love that, Sheila. I love how you just, we're birthing all the time. That's a really beautiful reminder. We're always experiencing something new, and experiencing things that are the same things that we've experienced a lot, but we can experience them in a more pleasurable way. Just getting our head around it. Look, we have run out of time, but it's just been absolutely wonderful having you here, and you're just the fountain of knowledge on it, and it's that reminder that you know, that the idea that pleasure and ecstaticness can be and should be part of everybody's birthing experience. So look, we're going to wind up from there, and thank you to those that are, you know, attend live. It's always wonderful to have our live audience, and I know that we have loads of work, people who are watching these videos later down the track. So thanks for our audience, and thank you, Sheila, for taking the time. And we wish everybody a wonderful rest of their week. Okay,
Thank you so
bye
much.
everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
See you.